Well, welcome everybody to this main stage session on tackling race inequality, and we'll run to about 3:30. I know some of you have attended actually Nick Cartwright's session earlier on inclusive education. I think we'll be able to cover quite a few of those issues that I saw raised there. I'll be chairing the session. Sally Everett, absolutely delighted to be member of the CABS EDI committee in education at King's Business School at King's College London. And so far, the sound and video seems to be okay. We've got one speaker that's will make it from the backstage to the session. Hopefully, Zainab will join us. But otherwise, I would like to introduce our speakers and then really just, I suppose, outline just a couple of things in terms of how we might interact with each other. So we've got an incredible panel. So thank you so much, colleagues, for joining us today. We have Professor Binna Kandola, OBE, who's partner of Pearn Kandola, will kick us off discussing the modern day manifestations of racism, how this impacts the well-being of minorities. And then Dr. Zainab Khan, Pro Vice-Chancellor, Outcomes and Inclusion, London Metropolitan University, and she'll focus her initial remarks on some of the current priorities for HEIs to deliver race equity for students. Then we've got two institutional overviews and some personal reflections. Professor Palie Smart, who is the head of School of Management at the University of Bristol, and then Professor Archibong, MBE, Strategic Advisor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Bradford. What I'll say just initially is that you can use the chat. I'll keep an eye on that, as well as the Q&A, and we'll take initial questions after speakers, but hopefully I'll bring everyone together and we can have a bit of a kind of full panel chat at the end. I have, I suppose, just wanted to take, two minutes and in terms of context on this, that, we've all witnessed deeply traumatic, deeply disturbing events. We've seen public statements from most of our universities about anti-racism work, commitment to racial equality, and it has proved to be a watershed in many ways for our leaders, an acknowledgement that racism happens in our universities and in our business schools. So I hope that we can all use this really as a flashpoint to review, accelerate, consolidate our work for race equity. And being on the EDI committee and being involved in inclusive education at King's, I certainly think business schools need to be actively anti-racist, and we need to be leading by example. Many of you may have attended, we had a race equality workshop that I chaired for CABS about 2 weeks ago, and I know CABS is really committed to following up with a network of those that are interested to share ideas and work on these issues that we will cover today. And there's also a survey that is coming around from CABS on looking at awarding gaps. So not just awarding gaps in terms of race, but across the board. But please do fill that in, because we want to know, how we can help institutions and what business schools are actively doing, what's working, and how we can really be part of the solution. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Binna Kandola as our first speaker. Binna, over to you.
Thank you, Sally. It's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you, everybody, for joining. The last 50 years has seen a real sea change in our explicit attitudes and behaviour on race. We are, compared to 50 years ago, we are far more accepting of having minorities as colleagues, as friends, as neighbours, as partners, and we are far more disapproving of somebody expressing explicit racist attitudes or behaving in very direct racist ways. And it would be easy to conclude, as some people have, that racism is on its way out. Now, whilst we should never take these changes for granted, we also need to be careful not to take them completely at face value, because like a virus, racism has mutated. And the type of things which are racist and which people kind of only consider to be the racist type behaviours are very direct, ugly, blunt, crude behaviours. Psychologists refer to those as old-fashioned racism. Modern racism, by way of contrast, is subtle, it's indirect, it's oblique, it's covert, and unless you're on the receiving end of it, you may not even realise that it's going on. And you'll have heard of the term microaggressions. I prefer the term micro-incivilities. I'm an occupational psychologist, a work psychologist. The area I work in is work and business, and there is a theory called the theory of organizational citizenship behavior, and that talks about civil behavior, support, respect, value, trust, And that is linked to improved performance of teams and individuals. And by way of contrast, you have uncivil behaviour, which is showing being disrespectful, aggressive, hostile, unsupportive, which is linked to poorer performance. And so I prefer to talk about micro incivilities. And these are kind of the everyday behaviours that, and also the aspects of the environment which signal to minorities that they are not welcome and that they don't belong. And the sorts of behaviours I'm talking about are things like never being invited to contribute to a meeting, or when you do contribute, actually being interrupted the whole time. I was given an example only last week on a Zoom call where somebody said whenever she's a minority, whenever she speaks, the team leader all of a sudden says, "I'm ever so sorry, I've got to jump off this call, I've got to go to another one." And she said it's a regular pattern. Or when people do contribute, they're interrupted. They're constantly being criticised and never praised for their work. Work that's been done by Jeff Beattie, the social psychology professor. He actually had real HR managers evaluate CVs, and then he had eye tracking technology embedded into the laptops. And what he found was, if the HR manager thought the CV was produced by a minority candidate, they spent more time looking at the negative information which was contained in the CV. So this constant kind of criticism. And other behaviours are things like constantly getting somebody's name wrong. This is about once or twice, it's consistently getting it wrong, or calling one minority by the name of the other minority in the department. This shows that actually a lack of regard and lack of respect for people's identity, and our name are actually very heart of our identity. And the smallest behaviour I've ever come across which can make somebody feel excluded is smaller than the gap between my thumb and forefinger. It's actually not looking at someone. And this isn't about not looking at anybody, because I've had people say that I'm very shy, I don't look at anybody. It's about not looking at that person. And how do you complain about that? So, well, actually, I want to make a complaint about that speaker. Yeah, what's your complaint? They didn't look at me. The response to that will be, well, what? How old are you? But actually, what it misses is that eye contact is fundamentally important to human contact. At its basic level, it acknowledges your presence in the room. But beyond that, it transmits emotion, trust, value, respect. And not giving somebody eye contact actually denies them all of those things. So these are micro behaviours, all right, micro incivilities. But their impact is anything but micro. We are very sensitive as human beings to a sense of being excluded. And we very quickly pick up the sense that I'm being isolated, that people pick up the sense that they're isolated. It then impacts their motivation and the sense of belonging to the team. And interestingly, because the behaviours are oblique and indirect and ambiguous, it's the ambiguity which plays on people's minds. And then people start to think, is this me? Am I paranoid? In fact, am I as good as I think I am? So it actually affects people's self-confidence. And beyond that, we know because these behaviours occur on a regular, daily basis, and sometimes on multiple occasions during the course of a day, it leads to risky behaviours as well, such as overeating, drinking too much, lack of exercise, which then leads to issues like diabetes, obesity, hypertension. So racism has transformed itself. It's transformed itself so successfully, actually, that many people will deny that it's still going on. But micro incivilities are one manifestation of them. And even though the behaviours are micro, their impact is anything but.
Thank you. There's a new term actually that I've just jotted down here as well. So every day is a learning day. So thank you very much. I noticed there is a question, but I'll take it, Natasha, your question perhaps at the end, because I think it's a question that pops up a number of times in terms of this aggregation of BAME as a label. And I know that our panelists will have a comment about that. So continue to put the questions in the Q&A, and we'll come back to that. There's probably not anything specific at the moment in terms of that. So what I'd love to do is really welcome our next speaker, so Zainab. Zainab Khan, You joined London Metropolitan very recently in your role, and I know you're going to talk about the priorities for HEIs in terms of delivering race equity. So, Zainab, over to you.
Thanks so much, and apologies I was slightly late joining. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much, Sally. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to sort of set the context in terms of what's going on within the sector. And of course, many colleagues will be familiar that over the course of the last 20 years, student demographics have changed so significantly within our institutions, and our access schemes, particularly those in post-92 institutions, have been so successful that we've witnessed the rise of minority serving universities in England, like my own at London Met, and I joined them a year ago, where 70% of our students are Black or ethnic minority. And annual statistics which are collected by HESA and then analysed by Advanced HE suggest that Black and minority students are actually more likely now to be studying business degrees at university than their white counterparts. But as a result of the student-led movements that we saw sort of gaining momentum over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, the sector was really found wanting, and we have been quite slow to wake up to the reality that admission into the academy does not of itself deliver equal opportunities and outcomes. And I'm sure many of us would agree that the progress has stagnated and it's been far too slow in terms of taking effective action to address institutional racism and those deeply rooted educational inequalities. In fact, it was personally, I found it very uncomfortable watching institutions issue their Black Lives Matter solidarity statements over the summer, because there are only a handful of institutions that are able to persuasively demonstrate evidence which matches their commitment to get tough on racism. So if we want real change, then actually everything has to change. And first of all, we need to start off by eliminating the idea that race equality work in our universities is some sort of philanthropic exercise, because those shiny, glass-walled, light-filled atrium business schools, which stand like phallic symbols of pride on our campuses, have in reality been paid for by the tuition fee income of Black and minority student fees. Such are their numbers now coming to university. So for us as educators, we need to see race equality work as being fully understood within the paradigm of social justice and recognition. Now, with the exception of 1 or 2 ethnic groups that remain missing in action, the headline problems which are facing all institutions are that our minority students are more likely to discontinue, they're less likely to progress or complete their studies on time, they're less likely to be awarded good honours degrees after their studies, and into the labour market, they're far less likely to secure graduate level employment. They face increased likelihoods of being unemployed, particularly if they're Black. And our minority students that are now in our institutions are demanding quite legitimately to know why their curriculums are white, why they're being shortchanged by an education system which erases their histories and instead offers them an awarding gap of sometimes up to the region of 30%, and why their academics and their leaders do not reflect them. And on the staff side, to coin the phrase that Roger Klein used in his own independent research into diversity of NHS leadership, we too in higher education are looking out on a mountain range of snowy white peaks. Black and minority staff are more likely to experience contract precarity for prolonged periods of time. They face ethnicity pay gaps. There are de minimis numbers in our professoriates and into executive leadership. And again, according to Advanced HE, there are fewer than 20 Black or minority ethnic individuals who hold the office of Pro Vice-Chancellor or above, and the vast majority of those 20 will not be Black. EHRC's report last year into racial harassment would have come as very little surprise for anyone who's following this discourse. And the report placed quite a lot of emphasis on the role of improving our processes for bullying and harassment. But you have to question what effect of better reporting systems are going to be felt when the majority of our appeals committees, review panels, line managers are all white. And I must quote from the Macpherson report, because that's essentially, you know, what the situation is in our status quo today. So that sort of seminal definition of institutional racism, which is the collective failure of organisations to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their colour, culture or ethnic origin, which can be seen and detected in processes, attitudes and behaviours which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness and racist stereotyping, which disadvantage ethnic minority people. That is what's borne out in the data. That's what's borne out in the storytelling that we hear from individuals of colour, both staff and students. So we've got to start looking at the staff and student issues holistically. There's lots of unlearning and relearning for us to do. I think there's a critical need for inclusive leadership to take centre stage, and that needs to be the golden thread of our organisational culture programme of change. And we need to embed values in the work that we do. Now, we know that culture is created from the top, and business schools are the ones that train the managers of the managers. So this is really about a root and branch review of organisational development. And I do think there's a real opportunity for business academics to really address this wicked problem, which begins in education and then, like a ripple effect, spills out into every single societal institution, which then go on to uphold those discriminatory practices that we see reflected in our own academic pipelines. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Always a really passionate plea, I think, call to action. So thank you. And I do hope you're listening and act on that. I don't think there's any specific questions at the moment, but, you know, colleagues ask the questions, and there are no silly questions. I'm always struck by colleagues say, oh, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. I don't feel comfortable about talking about race. This is where we can. So please put the questions in there, because I can guarantee that another colleague will probably be thinking about that question and wanting, you know, to reflect on it themselves. So please put it in the chat. Thank you very much. I suppose if we're looking now at a kind of, you know, what's happening locally in our business schools, I'd like to invite Professor Palie Smart, who's the head of School of Management at the University of Bristol, to really reflect on her role as a leader in this area in the business school. So Palie, please.
Thank you very much, Sally. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you, Oliver and Cavs, for the invite. So my role is quite different. So I've taken on the role of a head of a school of management, and completely can see, you know, how schools of management and, of course, schools of businesses can certainly support some of the societal issues that we're talking about. So we're a relatively new school. We've just branched out from economics, finance and management into an independent school. And we're going to be positioning ourselves as a school that takes global and societal issues seriously. So, you know, race representation and ethnicity is particularly important to us. We recognise that we are absolutely, you know, we're in the business of creating the next generation of organisational leaders. So we absolutely have a role there. Now, I became head of school, and then very quickly I was asked to perform a university level role, which is called a BAME champion. And there was no role description for this role. And I had spent 45 years of my life forgetting that I was BAME, actually, just to be able to get to where I am. And that's not, I mean, that's a common story. We heard it last year, I think, when Ruby McGregor was talking at CABS. And we know, certainly I know, as a head of a business school or management school, that delivering diversity is really important. And the Parker Review tells us, and all these reports are telling us, that we're just not doing enough. Progress, yes, it is absolutely being made, as Binna has already outlined, but it's not enough. So I found at a very personal level, this is quite an interesting position for me to be in, as somebody who is in this leadership role, absolutely finds a huge sense of responsibility and duty to take on the role, and yet I didn't really know what it was that I was taking on. So I've been slowly on a very steep learning curve, and I just want to say that the University of Bristol has 5 faculties and 24 schools, and the schools report into the faculties, and we have I would say, you know, quite a centralised governance structure. So we take direction. You know, we take, obviously the schools run the university, but we do take on big issues like this really, really good, clear direction from the university. So I just want to say a little bit about what the university is doing and how we might start to materialise some of the ideas that the university has at school level. And there are some really simple things that we can do, but then there are some much bigger things that we can do when we want to address policy and procedure. So we know that only 13% of the UK population in Spain. We know that approximately 5 or 6% take up management and leadership positions. So somebody like me, one thing we can certainly do is make sure that we have really good, gender and of course race representation on our senior leadership team. So we have got about 15% ethnic diversity on our senior leadership team. We have quite a big senior leadership team, and I'm really proud of that. And we have quite a useful leadership team as well. In my role as Spain champion, my role really is to be a conduit between the staff population and the senior team. But in that process, I've also been engaging with the student population. So as a university, we're doing some very sensible things. We've got a strategy in place. We've got a race equality committee, which is obviously signed up to the Race Equality Charter. We're going to be putting together various groups to look at decolonisation of the curriculum and make sure that we understand decolonisation of the curriculum as being a much broader agenda, not just what we teach, but it's about everything that we do. But of course, there are lots of schools that don't know what that means. So we are reaching out to our colleagues, obviously, in other faculties to help us with that discussion around decolonising. We're also, well, many of you will know that Bristol has had some very interesting time recently. So Binna, you referred to very difficult times of COVID and of course, Black Lives Matter, and of course, the coming down of the Edward Colston statue. That's raised huge issues for us as a university and anchor organisation in the city, and we've been asked to just rethink, the names of our buildings, etc. So we've set up some cross-faculty organisations to really start thinking hard about our past and how we talk about our past and how we're going to do that with our students. So I'll come on to the sorts of things that we're starting to think about doing. Okay, and of course, COVID-19 has brought sharp focus onto some of the race disparities. The other thing that I would say that we are also working towards plans to becoming explicitly anti-racist. We have an institutional statement around that, and we will be probably looking to formulate faculty and school level statements about what we mean by being an anti-racist organisation and what kinds of plans we need to put in place if we're going to have that kind of strategy will be overseen by our Race Equality Committee. The other things that I would say that some of the personal learnings that I've had over the past 6 months or so, they are very personal reflections, and I've perhaps sort of three or four main things really. First of all, I want to start with dialogue and breaking the silence. This does get talked about, and I think it is really important that we do break the dialogue. The people like me who have spent, like I said, nearly most of my lifetime not talking about it, not thinking about the colour of my skin or my race, now have to find a new language to be able to talk about it with younger generations. So I'm talking to students and I'm talking to much younger members of staff who have very interesting ways of reconstructing their experiences. So that's been a really interesting learning curve for me. But breaking the silence does mean, for me, a shared responsibility. We often ask the question, well, who's going to do the work? Because there's a lot of work to do. As Zainab just said, it's everywhere. And if we want to do this properly, we have to change an awful lot of things that we're doing, around research, around education, around how we engage in our civic responsibilities. So how do we do something like that? We can't simply say, well, it's not down to the BAME people. It's got to be down to those people with white privilege or with light privilege. Well, there's a lot of learning that we have to do. And I think there is an important role for self-learning. But I also feel that there is a role there to take some shared responsibility to start those conversations off together. And I think the ball will start to roll. And I think momentum will continue to move us forward. So I guess what I'm really saying is that we probably need to appeal to our common humanity to have these conversations. And that's really, really important because racism can be very dehumanizing for a lot of people. We can't forget the past, but we must progress together. The other thing I feel is to be careful that we don't overburden certain people. So when I took on the role, a few people did come and approach me and said, well, why are you taking on the role? Why not ask somebody else to do the role? Well, there was no other head of school that had a BAME background. So there was really me, or the job wasn't going to be done. As I say, I felt quite a strong sense of responsibility and duty to do it, so I was very happy. So one of the things that the university has done, they've appointed the UK's first Black female history professor, history of slavery, and she's going to be really helping us drive some of these measures forward. She's also going to be taking a leading role inside the city and leading the Race Commission for the city of Bristol. And that really brings me on to, just before I finish, but on the conversation side, opening up the dialogue, I think it's really important to have the conversations with students as well. They're very astute. You know, they're watching the statues come down. They're talking about Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ issues, and cancel culture. So I think it's really good to involve our students either in the classroom or in their various extracurricular societies. They're really, really engaged and want to know more. Of course, where better to start than education? Everything starts with education. So I think we're in a good place, you know, at universities. Teaching. Yes, the business school curriculum absolutely has a place. We talk about capitalism. We talk about international business. There are roots to these things that I think, yes, we can uncover some of those roots and really showcase the relationship between international trade, the slave trade, colorism, shadism, racism, culturalism, multiculturalism. There are lots of relationships here, even class. And I think these relationships are a little bit grey, where there's one end or where there's the other. But these demarcations, they all are really important. So I think these relationships, you can showcase those. And absolutely, we can talk about our colonial history when we talk about international business. So this is a shout out to our business historians to reach out to their fellow historians in the humanities to think about how we can do things a little bit better. We're thinking about ring fencing some resources, because of course, if you do want to make big changes, you need resources. So ring fencing some income, or some budget for pedagogical innovations, and really think hard about that. Ring fencing some scholarship for BAME research students, reaching out to the city, working with the city council on their leadership programs. They have a leadership program for the BAME community, and we send people on that. We're also happy to get involved with local social enterprises to develop new leadership programs as a business school. We have very little case clearinghouse material, called case centre material, you know, which showcases some of these colonial issues in our business case studies. So there are things I think that we can do there. And then I think finally, really, I think the point is that it is system-wide, and therefore collaboration is going to be key. We are all part of anchor institutions. We are in anchor institutions. So we need to reach out to other anchor institutions like the City Council, like the big businesses that have been there for decades and decades. Reach out collaboratively in a tri-sector partnership to really, really tackle these issues, I think, from the roots up. So I think I'll stop there. That's okay. Must have been about 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Palie. Loads of ideas there, and I'm sure people are jotting them down. And there was a question from Wendy about what would an anti-racist agenda look like for HE, and I think there are a number of different points you made there in that list. And again, I'll come to the whole panel with that question shortly, because I would like to invite Professor Archibong, MBE, Strategic Advisor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Bradford, to provide an institutional perspective. And then I think we'll open up, because we've got quite a few really interesting questions I'd like to open up to the panel. So over to you, Udu, please.
Thank you ever so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I think we have seen our world, and our world is broken in terms of how COVID-19 has exposed the inhumanity that goes with structural inequality. We've seen the death of George Floyd really throwing open things about how institutions, so it's not just the police, but I use hyper-policing as a way to say that we have it everywhere in our organizations. I think there is something about how the messages of solidarity around George Floyd was received. So most of us, and I know Zainab has already mentioned this, we just jumped there and had these messages out. But what I really liked was when people came back on social media to say, thanks for your message of support. Now, please, can you send in your image, the image of your executive team? And I just see that that was a world that was beginning to challenge, beginning to ask questions, beginning to say that lip service rhetoric will not do this for us. So in Bradford, we jumped in, and I really supported my university to adopt a state of emergency approach to it all. So it wasn't just about sending that message out. It was about actually reassuring staff that we've got a long-term strategy with early wins and so on that will help us to get there. So I started off with my own personal reflections, and I sent in a letter to all our executive leaders who then cascaded it throughout the institution. But the essence was actually to help us to start self-reflecting that we are in a fear zone, and that you cannot do much if you get paralyzed. You have to accept and not be defensive about where we are. So in Bradford, we started with this diagnosis of organizational problem, adopting a whole university approach, which was very interesting because I insisted on structural and intersectional way of dealing with this, the holistic and the systemic approach. So using some of the things that we already had in place, I was writing the EDI strategy at the time and looking at our access and participation plan and the work stream linked to that. I encouraged the university to start by insisting on this anti-racist way of being. So we launched our Anti-Racist University approach on the 21st of July, and it was exciting to see many colleagues come online to look at how these would work, and we scrapped the notion of decolonizing the curriculum and insisted on decolonizing the whole university and everything thereof, and linking that with the anti-racist university that we want to create and we want to become. We also had to openly declare what our anti-racist stance was, and we agreed that we were not satisfied in just being a diverse university. So like the other colleague who mentioned, 75% of our students are from a BME background. We also agreed that diversity is part of Universities of Bradford heritage, and celebrating that diversity was not enough, that we needed to do more, that we needed to confront inequality in order to be able to celebrate that diversity. Our claim to being University for Social Inclusion and Social Mobility has to be merged with real actions. We went on this mantra about, no, it's not about being non-racist, that's not enough, that the only way forward for Bradford is being anti-racist. That's where we are. We're now in the process of designing activities, really looking at what this anti-racist university and how we will emerge. In fact, it was really interesting when we had the launch on the 21st of July, we constructed a few questions for colleagues to help us and create some word clouds that would help us. What are the things that will enable? What are the things that will stop us from being this anti-racist university? And what would success look like by 2025? Now, it was really interesting because there were key things that emerged from the word cloud. HR was a big one. There was a big thing about denial. We cannot get there until we get out of this denial. We have to accept where we are and start working together towards where we want to go. There were huge things about representative workforce, not necessarily as a direct match for the 75% of our students that are from a BME background, but we were challenged to start looking at all levels of leadership, who's there, who needs to be there, that is not yet there. In my personal reflection, I did give the university and colleagues a few things that I thought we needed to do. One was about demanding accountability in this journey. And that accountability is not just from one group, it's for all of us. My colleague that has just spoken talked about breaking the silence, and we came at it from that, and it was strictly about how do we create and maintain safe spaces for those conversations, insisting that the conversations and the reflections will start from homogeneous group and then we go on to heterogeneous conversations. And we're traveling there. We also looked at, and I've already mentioned, the role of leadership. We all agreed that strong leadership and equipping our leaders with the tools to be able to lead and be transparent in that leadership was important for us. We also agreed that we need to work together to embrace organizational diagnosis. We've got to do this together. I'm just looking at what time I have. I do have one or two examples that I could share with you. The big one for me is about how do we promote that strong leadership. And one thing we've done is I have set up a learning partnership between our EB members, executive board members, and Black students in the first instance. And then we'll move on to having BME students paired up with other leaders and council members to learning partnership between different diverse staff and others, so that we get to this mode of just talking through and looking at lived experiences and not pretending that our university is not a white space because we've got 75% of our students from a BME background. Another specific thing is that we are working with our communities, just like Bristol. The city has set up an equalities groups, which I have been asked to chair, where we will have common equality objectives for the different constituents of the city, from public sector to private sector and so on, coming together. So I am chairing that group. But the other thing I just want to highlight before I get off is that we have an MSc in Artificial Intelligence and Data Analysis, and we've gained OFS funding to provide scholarship for students. And when we've set the criteria for gaining this scholarship, we've been very specific about who we want, but we're insisting on intersectionality. So we want to see how being from a BME intersect with other identity, gender, and so on. And I think we're really proud of the approach we are adopting in giving this this scholarship, because it's insistent on not just looking from a single lens, but a plural lens, to the extent that when we are prioritizing who gets the funding, we are looking at students with two or more underrepresented groups, students with two or from two or more underrepresented groups. And I think there is a lot we are doing. I personally think that the higher education sector should stop insisting on being liberal, because that is not helping anybody. I think we have to accept that hyper-policing stays with all organizations. So why are we over-assessing people from a Black and minority ethnic backgrounds when you're looking at disciplinary action? Mm-hmm. What about over-assessment of our students in the way we give awards, to the extent that we have these gaps? What about Black pathologizing? How do we ensure that bringing people around the table and involving people from all backgrounds does not take us to a place where we're saying, in order for you to be part of what we're doing, you've got to behave in a particular way? I'm saying to my colleagues, I don't want you to tell me that a Black staff has not been invited to something because they didn't behave in whatever way. We are a university that wants people to be themselves and bring themselves to the university. And therefore, that has to translate everything that we do. I think I have to stop there. Thank you very much. your time.
Thank you, Udi. Wow, I've got an enormous list of things, and actually many of the questions I think have been asked in terms of what is an anti-racist agenda. You've outlined, the whole panel have outlined so many different ideas, and I do know that CABS want to bring everyone that's that's interested in really pushing this forward together. So this is part of the conversation, and we share these ideas, these toolkits and guidance. I'm aware this session should be much longer, I think, in terms of the sessions. But what I would encourage the panel to do, perhaps, is there are some questions about this idea of this aggregation of BAME. I wonder whether maybe just quickly, maybe kind of Binna, thoughts on this aggregation, this BAME that we kind of use. Is that helpful or not in terms of this aggregation of minorities into one group? Is that something that we haven't covered?
The language changes all the time. I don't actually. The acronym stands for Black and Minority Ethnic. I don't mind. Oh, I'm not actually quite sure what the A stands for. It may be Black, Asian, Minority Ethnic.
Yeah.
But the phrase itself, I don't have a difficulty with. The race may be like a fictitious kind of concept, something that we've created. Nevertheless, it is a reality. And so we do need names. The names change all the time. I think people have a difficulty with the acronym BAME. And also this idea that the race is a hierarchy, and the experience of the B is different from the AIM. And when we condense it into just an acronym like that, we fail to kind of see that even though there are commonalities between groups, there are also differences.
Thank you. I mean, Zainab, I'd see you nodding. Is there anything you'd just like to kind of add? I know you deal with this phrase.
Yeah, I mean, I also find the expression BAME frustrating. I wouldn't imagine many minority individuals would self-identify as BAME, but it is a really useful policy label nonetheless. And we know that within our own sector, it's used to direct certain resources, whether that's to do with access and participation or for enabling external reporting to the OFS. So I certainly wouldn't want to sort of promote the abandonment of a label which fundamentally it's about shedding light on disadvantaged or marginalized groups. We need something, but it becomes a distraction. I do think, however, that some individuals do feel strongly about it. So it's always worth colleagues having conversations within their own institutional community, so with students and staff from those backgrounds, to see if we can come to an agreed term that works for everyone. But these terms are transient and they change.
Palie.
Yeah, I completely agree that I also, having been in this role, I'm having to use the term more, just in general conversations. And I am noticing that organisations are starting to, some are publicly saying that they're not going to be using the term anymore. Not sure what they are going to be using, but they are moving away from it. I suppose one of the things, I haven't come to a conclusion on this at all, but one thing that is noticeable, though, that the acronym BAME, it does create a demarcation around skin colouring. So, it does bring together or group together communities of colour against those that are non-coloured. So I think, there is that thing, that is something that we might want to think about. Because, of course, that then roots into issues around colorism and shadism, which, of course, are, global issues and perhaps have been around for longer than European colonialism. So I think there are it would be interesting to talk to organisations, I think, that have actively moved away from it and to really understand the reasons why they've moved away from it. So I think if we're talking about disparities, there are lots of different ways in which people are discriminated against, and not just because they're BAME, but there are other characteristics. So I think this sort of separation into coloured and non-coloured communities, is something that I think perhaps does need some attention.
Thank you. I mean, I'm very aware that I'm running over time, but there is a general kind of comment in the chat that I think it would be very useful for the panel to share ideas on and thoughts on the questions. So what I'm proposing to do is perhaps we can take the questions and actually get some written responses and thoughts, and that will feed into the network and the longer conversation that I know that CABS wants to have. I hate cutting this off because actually there's so many questions. I want to say thank you so much to the panel. I think that was an excellent conversation, discussion. I'm delighted that all the audio and the video worked as well. So thank you very much. And Oliver, I guess we go out and do the groups now.
That's right, and thank you very much indeed, Sally. And to echo that, thank you to our panel. This is absolutely critical discussion, one which CAVS wants to facilitate and foster in a number of different ways, and it'll be great to work with you all as we build on today's discussions going forward. So thank you very much to our panel. Thank you to Sally for chairing. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and that's the end of this session.
Thank you.